What's good, everybody? Today we've got a family story that'll make you check your phone's voice recorder app. Because this guy? He came prepared. A financial planner flies home for the holidays. Nice flight, good vibes, ready for Christmas with the family. But the night before the big dinner, he overhears something he wasn't supposed to hear. His parents and his sister in the kitchen, planning how to get him to cover $8,000 in holiday expenses. 8 grand. For a Christmas dinner and vacation they planned without asking him. He doesn't confront them. He doesn't storm in. He records the conversation. Then he sits down at that dinner table the next night, waits for the pitch, and plays the recording out loud for everyone to hear. The table goes dead silent. His sister starts crying. His mother says, "You were never supposed to hear that." And this man gets up, drives to a hotel, and books himself a solo vacation. This is cold, calculated, and honestly, deserved. Let's get into it. I flew home for Christmas. The night before dinner, I overheard my family plotting to get me to pay $8,000 in holiday expenses. So I recorded it. Then I played it at the table. I want to start by saying that I didn't go home for Christmas looking for a fight. I really didn't. I was actually in a pretty great headspace. Work had been solid. I just closed a big quarter, and I was genuinely looking forward to spending time with my family. That's what makes this whole thing so much worse. I came in with good intentions and left with a hotel reservation. My name's Jake. I'm 31. I work as a financial planner at a wealth management firm in Charlotte. The short version of what I do is I help people with money make smart decisions about their money. Asset allocation, retirement planning, tax strategy, estate planning, that kind of thing. I'm not a Wall Street guy or anything like that. I wear a tie to work, I sit in a nice office, and I have conversations with people about their futures. I'm good at it because I actually care about the numbers and, more importantly, I care about people not getting taken advantage of financially, which is ironic given what happened to me over Christmas. But we'll get there. I grew up in Ohio, small town outside of Columbus, the kind of place where everyone knows your business, and the biggest event of the year is the high school football homecoming game. My parents still live there. My dad, Bill, is 58 and works as a plant manager at a manufacturing facility. My mom, Linda, is 56 and does part-time bookkeeping for a couple of small businesses in town. My sister, Claire, is 28 and works as an office administrator for a dental practice. She still lives about 10 minutes from my parents. The three of them are close, really close. And I don't mean that in a heartwarming, isn't that nice kind of way. I mean it in a they operate as a unit and I'm the outsider kind of way. Always have been. Growing up, it was Dad, Mom, and Claire as this tight little triangle, and I was the kid who happened to live in the same house. I wasn't mistreated. I wasn't neglected in any obvious way. I was just peripheral. The fourth chair at a 3-person table. I left for college at 18, went to Ohio State, studied finance, graduated, got a job, moved to Charlotte, and built a life. I come home for major holidays. Christmas, Thanksgiving, sometimes Easter if the timing works. Every time I come back, it's the same dynamic. The three of them have their rhythms, their inside jokes, their shorthand. And I show up like a guest who's been given a temporary pass. "Oh, Jake's here. Great. Set an extra plate." Quick example. 2 Thanksgivings ago, I flew in on Wednesday evening. Got to my parents' house around 8. My mom, Dad, and Claire were sitting in the living room watching a movie they'd clearly started without any intention of waiting for me. My mom said, "Oh, you're here. We saved you some leftover Chinese." They'd ordered dinner together, watched a movie together, and didn't think to wait an hour for me to land. I ate cold lo mein on the kitchen counter while they finished their film. Welcome home, Jake. I've been the financially responsible one in the family since I was about 23. I don't say that to brag, I say it because it matters for the story. I started making decent money in my mid-20s, and by 28 I was earning more than both my parents combined. That's not because I'm some genius. It's because wealth management pays well if you're good at it, and I put in the work. I maxed out my retirement accounts, built up savings, invested carefully, and lived below my means for years. I drive a reasonable car. I rent a nice apartment, but not an extravagant one. I have no debt. I've been smart with money because that's literally my job. The problem is that my family figured out I had money. And once they figured that out, the dynamic shifted. Subtly at first, then not subtly at all. It started maybe 3 years ago. I'd come home for Christmas and my dad would casually mention that the furnace was acting up and repairs were expensive. My mom would sigh about how groceries cost so much more than they used to. Claire would talk about how her car needed new brakes, but she was stretched thin. These conversations always happened within earshot of me. Never directed at me exactly. Just aimed in my general direction. Like how you put food near a stray cat and wait for it to come closer. The first time I bit, it was the furnace thing. My dad mentioned the repair estimate was $1,800. He didn't ask me for money. He just left the number hanging in the air like a fly ball waiting to be caught. And I caught it. I said, "Dad, I'll cover the furnace." His face did this thing. Relief mixed with something I couldn't quite name. He said, "You don't have to do that, son." I said I wanted to, and I did at the time. I wanted to help. That's what family does. After that, it became a pattern. Claire's car needed tires, $400. Mom's bookkeeping software needed an upgrade, $600. The roof had a leak, $2,200. My dad's truck needed transmission work, $3,000. Every visit, there was something. And every time, the ask came the same way. Not as a direct request, but as a strategically placed complaint designed to trigger my instinct to fix things. They'd learned that I wouldn't say no if they presented it as a hardship. So they kept presenting hardships. I want to be fair here. Some of these were legitimate expenses. The furnace really was broken. The roof really did leak. I'm not saying they invented problems to squeeze me. But over 3 years, I added it up. And I'm a financial planner, so yeah, I added it up. And I'd given them close to $19,000. 19 grand in helping out. That was never really helping out. It was subsidizing. I was subsidizing their household while also trying to build my own life 4 states away. And here's the thing that really got under my skin. Not once, not a single time, did any of them say, "We'll pay you back." Not once did anyone acknowledge the pattern. Not once did my dad sit me down and say, "Son, we appreciate what you've been doing, and we want you to know we don't take it for granted." It was just expected. Jake has money. Jake will help. Jake always helps. File it under things we don't need to discuss. I started pulling back about a year ago. I stopped volunteering to cover things. When my mom mentioned the dishwasher was making a weird noise, I said, "That's annoying. Hope it works out." When Claire complained about her rent going up, I said, "Yeah, everything's getting more expensive." I stopped being the wallet, and I could feel the temperature change. The conversations got a little shorter. The texts got a little less frequent. The warmth, what little there was, cooled by a degree or two. Nothing dramatic, just enough to notice. But I still went home for Christmas, because despite all of it, they're my family. And I kept hoping, probably stupidly, that one year we'd just have a normal holiday. No financial ambushes, no sideways requests, just turkey and pie and maybe a board game and everyone pretending to like each other's gifts. That's all I wanted. Let me jump in. This is me, not Jake. This man has given his family close to $19,000 over 3 years. Not because they asked, because they engineered situations where his instinct to help kicked in. Present a problem, drop a dollar amount, wait for Jake to open his wallet. That's not family helping family. That's a system. I'm calling these 3 the committee. They don't ask Jake for money. They convene, strategize, and deploy. Jake's a financial planner who's been getting played by amateurs. But the planner just realized he's been reading the wrong spreadsheet. And he's about to audit the whole operation. So, Christmas. This past December. I flew into Columbus on December 23rd. My mom picked me up from the airport, which was nice. She was chatty in the car, talking about the dinner she was planning for Christmas Eve, how Claire was bringing her new boyfriend, a guy named Doug, who apparently sells insurance and has opinions about everything, and how Dad had put up the outdoor lights for the first time in 3 years. Normal stuff, pleasant stuff. I relaxed a little. Maybe this year would be different. We got to the house and it looked great, honestly. My mom had gone all out with decorations, wreaths on every window, garland on the banister, one of those inflatable snowmen in the front yard that my dad has always hated but tolerates because my mom loves it. The tree was up in the living room, lights and ornaments, the whole deal. It smelled like cinnamon and pine. I dropped my bag in my old bedroom, which is now half guest room, half storage for my mom's craft supplies, and thought, okay, this is fine. This is Christmas. I can do this. The 23rd was uneventful. We had dinner, my mom made her beef stew, which is one of her better dishes, and watched some holiday movie on TV. Claire came over for a bit with Doug. Doug talked about insurance deductibles for 20 minutes. I nodded politely. My dad fell asleep in his recliner around 9. Standard operating procedure. Here's where things change. I went to bed around 11. My old bedroom is at the end of the upstairs hallway, right above the kitchen. The house is old, built in the 70s, and the insulation between floors is basically decorative. You can hear everything from the kitchen if you're in that bedroom. Always could. When I was a kid, I used to lie in bed and listen to my parents talking after they thought I was asleep. Most of the time it was boring adult stuff, bills, schedules, whose turn it was to drive me to practice. But sometimes you'd catch something interesting. A fight they thought you couldn't hear. A worry they didn't want you to know about. It's like having a free subscription to a podcast you never asked for. On the night of December 23rd, at about 11:30, I heard voices downstairs. I wasn't asleep yet. I was scrolling my phone, half reading the news, half thinking about nothing. The voices were my mom, my dad, and Claire. I figured they were just talking, maybe wrapping presents or something. But then I heard my name. Not in a casual way, not Jake seems tired or Jake looks good. It was Jake in the context of a sentence that made my stomach drop. I put my phone down and listened. My dad said something like, and I'm paraphrasing what I heard through the floor. We need to figure out how to bring this up to Jake. My mom's voice quieter. He's been different lately. He didn't offer to help with anything this year. Claire. Because he's being weird about money. I told you guys, he's pulling away. My dad. We've got $8,000 in expenses between the dinner, the cabin rental, and everything else. We can't cover that. Let me pause on that. $8,000. For a Christmas that I was apparently expected to fund. A dinner I didn't plan. At a cabin I didn't book. For a holiday I was invited to as a guest. $8,000. I sat up in bed. My heart was going fast, but my brain was doing what it always does, shifting into analysis mode. This is what I do for a living. When a client tells me something that doesn't add up, I don't react. I gather data. I assess. I plan. And lying in that bed in my childhood bedroom, with the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling from when I was 9 years old, that's exactly what I did. I picked up my phone. I opened the voice recorder app, and I held it near the heating vent in the floor, the one that connects directly to the kitchen, and I pressed record. What I got over the next 12 minutes was the committee in full session. My mom outlined the expenses. The Christmas Eve dinner was catered. She'd ordered from some upscale place in town because she wanted it to be special this year. That was $2,800. The cabin rental, apparently they'd booked a cabin at a state park for the day after Christmas, some family getaway thing nobody had mentioned to me, was $3,200. Then there were gifts, decorations, and incidentals that added up to another $2,000. $8,000 total. My dad's contribution to the planning was mostly logistical. He said things like, "We'll bring it up at dinner. Frame it as splitting costs. He won't say no in front of everyone." My dad, my own father, was coaching my mom and sister on how to corner me at Christmas dinner. Claire's role was more targeted. She said, and I remember this one clearly because it hit different, "Just remind him he makes way more than any of us. He can afford it. It's not like he has a wife or kids to spend it on." That one right there. It's not like he has a wife or kids to spend it on. As if my money is less valid, less mine, because I'm single. As if the life I've built is just a holding pattern until I have a family that would justify keeping my own income. They talked about how to phrase it. My mom suggested saying something like, "We all pitched in for the planning, so it's only fair to split the costs." My dad said, "Don't mention the exact number right away. Let him agree to splitting first, then show him the breakdown." That's a sales tactic. My father was using a sales tactic on me. At Christmas. Claire added, "If he pushes back, just remind him about the furnace. And the roof. He helped with those, so he can't suddenly act like family doesn't help family." Using my own generosity as a weapon. Using the fact that I'd already given them thousands of dollars as justification for asking for thousands more. That's not family helping family. That's a debt trap dressed up in tinsel. I recorded all of it. 12 minutes and 43 seconds. Then I stopped the recording, put my phone on the nightstand, and lay there in the dark staring at those glow-in-the-dark stars that haven't actually glowed in 15 years. I have to jump in. The committee held a full strategy session in the kitchen, while Jake was one floor above them, with a heating vent that doubles as a microphone. They rehearsed the framing. Dad's coaching the family on objection handling, like it's a quarterly sales meeting. And Claire said he can afford it because he doesn't have a wife or kids. That's not a financial argument. That's a personal attack wrapped in a spreadsheet. These three reverse-engineered a guilt trip. They didn't ask him. They plotted against him. And the man they're plotting against? He plans finances for a living. They brought a napkin to a spreadsheet fight. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed running scenarios the way I run projections for clients. If X happens, what's the best response? If they frame it as Y, how do I redirect? I wasn't angry, or maybe I was, but the anger was underneath something colder. Something more precise. I felt like I'd been handed the answer key to a test I'd been failing for years, without knowing why. All those carefully placed complaints. All those sighs about expenses. All those conveniently timed mentions of costs. It was never organic. It was coordinated. The committee had been running this play for years, and I'd been falling for it every single time. Christmas Eve morning. I came downstairs and everything was normal. My mom was making cinnamon rolls. My dad was reading the news on his tablet. Claire showed up around 10 with Doug, who immediately started talking about homeowners insurance. The house smelled like sugar and pine needles. Christmas music was playing from the little speaker my mom keeps on the kitchen windowsill. Everyone was smiling. And I smiled too. Because I had a plan. I spent the day being pleasant. Helped my dad hang a wreath that had fallen off the front door. Played cards with Claire and Doug. Doug is surprisingly competitive at gin rummy, and also a sore loser, which tracks for someone who sells insurance. Helped my mom set up the dining room for the big dinner. I complimented the decorations. I laughed at my dad's jokes. I was the perfect holiday guest. And inside my pocket, my phone sat with 12 minutes and 43 seconds of audio that was going to change everything. The catered dinner arrived around 5, and credit where it's due, my mom picked well. Roasted prime rib, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, bread rolls, the works. She'd also ordered 2 pies, pumpkin and pecan, from a bakery in town. The table looked beautiful. Candles lit, the good china out, cloth napkins. My mom had clearly wanted this to feel special. And it did. For about 45 minutes. We ate. We talked. It was actually pleasant. Doug told a story about a client who tried to claim their cat as a dependent, which was genuinely funny. My dad told his annual story about the time he almost burned down the kitchen making Christmas cookies in 1994. Claire showed everyone pictures of a stray cat she'd been feeding behind her apartment building. She wants to adopt it. Doug is allergic. Doug does not look allergic to anything. Doug looks like he sells insurance. My mom kept getting up to refill dishes and make sure everyone had enough. It was, for a little while, a real family Christmas dinner. Then the dishes were cleared. The pies were served. And my dad leaned back in his chair and said the words I'd been waiting for. So, Jake, your mom and I were thinking, since this year's Christmas was a real group effort, it'd be nice to split some of the costs. You know, keep it fair. There it was. The pitch. Delivered almost word for word the way they'd rehearsed it the night before. Group effort. Split. Fair. Every word chosen to make it sound reasonable. Collaborative. Like I was being invited to participate rather than ambushed into paying. I looked at my dad. Then at my mom. Then at Claire. Then at Doug, who was eating pecan pie and clearly had no idea what was about to happen. I said, "Sure, Dad. I think that's a great idea. But before we get into numbers, I want to play something for everyone." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the voice recorder app. I set the phone on the table between the candles and the butter dish, and I pressed play. The kitchen came through the speaker first, that ambient sound of a room at night, the hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock above the stove. Then voices, my dad's voice. "We need to figure out how to bring this up to Jake," my mom's voice. "He's been different lately. He didn't offer to help with anything this year." Claire's voice. "Because he's being weird about money." I watched their faces as 12 minutes and 43 seconds of strategy meeting played out on the dining room table next to the good china, and the cloth napkins. I watched my dad's face go from confusion to recognition to something I'd never seen before. A kind of exposed panic, like a man who just realized the meeting he thought was private was being broadcast on a loudspeaker. My mom's hand went to her mouth. Claire's face went red. Doug stopped eating his pie, which might be the most remarkable thing that happened all night because Doug had been eating nonstop since he arrived. Nobody spoke. The recording played. Every word of it. The catering cost. The cabin rental. My dad's coaching on how to frame the ask. Claire's comment about how I don't have a wife or kids. My mom's suggestion to guilt me with the word fair. All of it. In their own voices. In a room that was dead silent except for the playback and the sound of the furnace. The same furnace I'd paid $1,800 to fix, kicking on in the basement. When the recording ended, I picked up my phone and put it back in my pocket. My sister started crying. Not loud, dramatic crying. The quiet kind. The kind that happens when someone realizes they've been caught and the shame hits before the defense mechanisms kick in. Her shoulders shook and she stared at the tablecloth. My mom was the first to speak. She said, and I will never forget this. You were never supposed to hear that. Not, we're sorry. Not, that's not what it sounds like. Not, we should have talked to you directly. Just, you were never supposed to hear that. As if the problem wasn't what they did. The problem was that I found out. I let that sentence sit in the air for a moment. Then I said, that's the thing, Mom? I wasn't supposed to hear it. But I did. And now I know exactly what this is. My dad tried to recover. He said, Jake, come on. You're taking this out of context. We were just trying to figure out how to bring it up. That's all. It sounds worse than it is. Classic deflection. Reframe the evidence as a misunderstanding. I've seen clients try this when their portfolio losses come out worse than they expected. The numbers look worse than they are. No, Dad. The numbers are exactly what they are. I said, Dad, you literally said he won't say no in front of everyone. That's not figuring out how to bring it up. That's figuring out how to trap me. Claire looked up from the tablecloth and said, Jake, I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said about the wife and kids thing. That came out wrong. I said, it came out exactly the way you meant it, Claire. You think because I'm single, my money is the family's money. You said it. I heard it. Let's not pretend otherwise. She started crying harder. Doug put his hand on her shoulder and looked at me with an expression that said, I just came here for free food and now I'm in a hostage situation. I almost felt bad for Doug. Almost. Okay. You were never supposed to hear that. That's what his mother said. Not, I'm sorry. Not, we should have been honest. Her first reaction to getting caught scheming against her own son was to be upset that he found out. The committee doesn't feel guilty about what they do. They feel inconvenienced when the plan fails. And Dad's defense? It sounds worse than it is. It is the sound. There's no context that makes he won't say no in front of everyone sound like healthy family communication. Jake played the receipts at the dinner table, literally. And the recording doesn't lie, even if they've been lying to themselves for years. My mom tried again. She said, Jake, we were going to talk to you about it. We just wanted to figure out the best way. We didn't want to make it awkward. I said, you didn't want to make it awkward? You planned an $8,000 Christmas and your strategy for getting me to pay for it was to ambush me at dinner. How is that not awkward? She said, it wasn't an ambush. We were going to ask you. We just wanted to find the right moment. I said, the right moment was before you booked the caterer. The right moment was before you reserved the cabin. The right moment was any time in the last 3 months when you could have called me and said, hey Jake, we're planning a bigger Christmas this year and we're hoping everyone can chip in. That's what normal families do. They don't hold planning sessions at midnight about how to psychologically maneuver someone into writing a check. My dad said, you're blowing this out of proportion. And I could see him getting frustrated, not at himself, but at me, for ruining the evening, for not going along with the plan, for being difficult. That's always been my role in their eyes when I don't comply. I'm being difficult. Not reasonable, not boundary setting. Difficult. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I looked around the table. at the prime rib and the good china and the candles and the pie and the cloth napkins and this whole beautiful setup that I was apparently supposed to fund without being consulted. I said, I've given this family close to $19,000 over the last 3 years. Furnace, roof, tires, truck repairs, brakes, software, all of it. And not once, not one single time, did anyone say thank you in a way that wasn't followed by another request. I'm done being the family ATM. I'm done being the one who's expected to pay because I'm single and because I've been stupid enough to say yes before. This is the last Christmas I fund. Actually, this is the last Christmas I attend. My mom gasped. Claire put her head down on the table. My dad said, "Sit down, Jake." I said, "No." I grabbed my jacket from the coat rack by the front door. I grabbed my bag from the bedroom. I'd already packed it before dinner because I knew where this was heading. I walked out the front door past the inflatable snowman and the wreaths and the lights my dad had hung. I got in my rental car, and I drove to a hotel about 20 minutes away. I checked in, got a room with a king bed and a view of the parking lot, sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for about 15 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and booked a flight to Miami for the next morning. Found a beachfront hotel with availability, booked 5 nights. I spent Christmas Day through New Year's on a beach by myself, reading books and eating overpriced seafood, and not once, having to wonder if someone at the table was calculating how much money they could extract from me. It was the best vacation I've ever taken. Last bridge from me. This man packed his bag before dinner. He walked into that dining room with a recording on his phone and a suitcase by the door. That's not impulsive. That's a financial planner applying his skill set to a personal betrayal. He prepared for every outcome and executed the exit with zero wasted motion. The committee spent weeks planning their ambush. Jake spent one night planning his counter-ambush. Now he's on a beach in Miami, while they're sitting in Ohio, wondering what happened. Sometimes the quiet ones aren't quiet because they have nothing to say. They're quiet because they're listening. I want to finish this with the aftermath because I know people are going to ask. I got a flood of texts on Christmas Day. My mom sent about 14 messages ranging from "please come back" to "you ruined Christmas" to "I can't believe you recorded us." My dad sent one text that said, "That was uncalled for, Jake." Claire sent a long message apologizing for the wife and kids comment, but also saying I humiliated her in front of Doug. Doug, for the record, texted me separately to say, "Hey man, no hard feelings, crazy night," which is probably the most reasonable thing anyone in my family's orbit has said in years. Doug's all right, actually. I didn't respond to any of the family texts for 3 days. I needed space. I needed to be away from the gravitational pull of their guilt and their expectations, and their endless, exhausting financial choreography. On December 28th, I sent a group text to my parents and Claire that said, "I love you guys, but I need you to understand something." What I heard in that kitchen wasn't a family trying to figure out how to ask for help. It was a family trying to figure out how to take from me without it looking like taking. I've been your safety net for 3 years, and I didn't mind at first because I thought it was temporary. It wasn't. It was a system. And I don't want to be part of that system anymore. I'm not cutting you off, but the money stops. If you need help, ask honestly. Don't plan. Don't strategize. Don't rehearse. Just ask. And understand that the answer might be no. My mom responded with, "We just wanted a nice Christmas." My dad didn't respond at all. Claire sent back a single sentence, "I'm sorry." It's been about 3 months now. I didn't go home for New Year's or for my dad's birthday in February. My mom and I have talked on the phone twice. Short, surface-level calls. She hasn't brought up money. My dad and I haven't spoken directly. Claire and I text occasionally. She actually seems to be doing some genuine reflecting based on some of the things she said. She told me last month that she'd been thinking about how many times she'd heard my parents talk about what Jake can cover and how she'd never really questioned it before. That felt like a real moment. Small but real. I don't know what happens next. Maybe we rebuild. Maybe we don't. I don't feel angry anymore. I felt angry on that drive to the hotel, and I felt angry on the flight to Miami, and I felt angry for the first few days on that beach. But somewhere around day 3, sitting in a chair looking at the ocean with a book I'd been meaning to read for 2 years, the anger turned into something quieter. Relief, maybe. Or clarity. The kind of clarity you get when you finally stop performing a role that was written for you by people who only cared about what you could provide. I spent $19,000 learning that my family saw me as a resource. I spent $800 on a hotel and a flight learning that I don't have to be one. I'd say the $800 was the better investment. And that is the story. I gotta be honest, this one hit different for me. The recording at the dinner table is dramatic, sure. That's the moment everyone's going to talk about. But the part that sticks with me is the kitchen conversation. The idea that your own parents and your own sister would sit around at night and plan how to extract money from you, not how to ask, but how to manipulate you into saying yes. That's the part that turns this from a holiday argument into something deeper. Jake didn't blow up. He didn't scream. He didn't flip the table. He did exactly what a financial planner would do. He gathered the evidence, waited for the right moment, and presented the data. And the data was devastating because it was their own words. You can't spin your own voice. I think the biggest takeaway here is that generosity without boundaries eventually turns into exploitation. And the people who exploit you will never see it that way. They'll always frame it as family helping family or keeping things fair. But fair only flows in one direction in a lot of these families. It flows toward whoever has the most money and the least willingness to say no. Jake finally said no, and it cost him a Christmas. But I think it saved him a lot more than that. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious about this one. If you were Jake, would you have played the recording at the table, or would you have confronted them privately first? Let me know. Like the video if you made it this far, subscribe if you're new, and I'll catch you in the next one. Today's story is about a guy who did everything right. He saved up, he waited, he picked a spot that actually meant something. Got down on one knee and asked the woman he'd spent 4 years with to marry him. She said no. So he gave it another year, planned something even bigger, roses, candles, friends involved, the whole setup, and asked again. She said no again. The second she realized he was genuinely walking out the door, she said yes. He left anyway. Get comfortable. This one's going to get under your skin. I proposed twice. She said, not now. After the second rejection, I finally said, then we're done. She didn't expect what happened next. Nadia and I met at a party neither of us wanted to be at. Our friends basically guilted us both into showing up. Her crew dragged her there and mine dragged me. And if you'd told either of us walking in that night that we'd spend the next 4 years together, we both would have laughed. I was standing near the back with a soda, half plotting my exit, when she walked over and started quietly making fun of the music. Not to the room, just to me, like we already had some unspoken agreement about the playlist. We talked the whole night. Just easy stuff. Bad movies we'd both seen. Weird things that happened in our childhoods. Places we'd visited that didn't live up to the hype. She had this story about a family vacation that went completely off the rails in the least dramatic, but somehow funniest way possible, and I was genuinely losing it by the time she got to the end of it. By the time people started heading out, I already knew this wasn't a normal conversation. I asked for her number before I left. We made it official a few weeks later. For the first couple of years, the relationship just worked. Nadia was sharp, funny, always in on the joke. She had this way of paying attention in conversation that made you feel like whatever you were saying actually mattered. Not performatively, just genuinely present. She remembered small things. Not just birthdays and anniversaries, but the little stuff. The name of a coworker I'd complained about once. What specifically stressed me out about a project at work. What I'd ordered the first time we went to a particular restaurant. It sounds like nothing written out like that, but that kind of attention adds up over time, and you start to feel actually known by someone rather than just coexisted with. We had overlapping taste in enough things to make weekends easy. Same general approach to movies, same preference for a good night in over going out just to say we went out, same sense of humor that let dumb stuff be funny instead of exhausting. And just enough differences to keep it from going flat. She pushed back on me when she disagreed. Didn't just agree with whatever I said to keep things smooth. I respected that about her. The whole relationship had this low drama quality that I'd learned, watching other people's situations fall apart over the years, was actually harder to find than people think. We had this thing where whenever one of us had a bad week, we'd do this completely dumb tradition we'd made up in year one. Just order the worst food we could find on the delivery app, put on the most objectively terrible movie either of us could locate, and spend the whole night making fun of both. It sounds stupid because it is stupid, but it worked every time without fail. She was good at that kind of thing, making the low points feel manageable without turning it into some big emotional processing session. I've thought about that specific thing more than once since all of this happened, if I'm being honest about it. The day-to-day was just good for a long time. That's the part that makes this harder to explain to people on the outside who want a clear villain. She wasn't a bad person. She wasn't treating me badly. The relationship, for most of those 4 years, was genuinely one of the better things in my life. That context matters, because it's what made the proposal feel like a formality rather than a gamble. And it's also what made the rejection hit so much harder than I expected. Around the 2-year mark, I started actually thinking about the future. Not the vague, yeah, someday we'll probably get married thing couples say, because it's expected. I mean, I was making real mental plans. I started setting money aside for a ring and told myself I'd wait until I felt more financially solid before I did anything about it. That felt like the responsible move. I didn't want to propose and then immediately stress about every expense while she was looking at venues online. She deserved a real proposal with a real plan backing it up, not just the gesture on its own. What made me confident about all of it was that we'd already talked about marriage directly. Not as some abstract future concept, she'd told me more than once that she couldn't imagine being with anyone else, that she wanted to build something real. So when I finally started putting the proposal together after about a year of saving and thinking it through, I genuinely wasn't sweating the outcome. It felt like a formality at that point. A good one, but still. I planned it at the beach where we'd had our first date. Just us. No crowd, no restaurant with strangers watching, no production that felt more like a performance than an actual moment. That first date we'd both been broke, packed a cheap picnic, sat on the sand, and talked until it got too cold to stay. I wanted to bring it back to that. I made sure the timing lined up with sunset because Nadia had always talked about how much she loved that hour, the sky when it turns all orange and pink. The weather cooperated. One of those evenings where everything looks like something you'd see on a screensaver, and for once it doesn't feel fake. We walked the shore for a bit, just talking about whatever was going on in our lives. I'd been carrying the ring in my jacket all day, and kept reminding myself not to force the moment, just let it arrive. When it felt right, I stopped, took her hand, and said what I'd been meaning to say for 2 years. How sure I was. How I didn't want to keep doing the almost thing. Then I got down on one knee and pulled out the ring. She looked at me. For what felt like a full minute, she just looked at me. Then she said, "I want to marry you, just not right now." I stayed on one knee for a beat too long before I stood up. My brain was still trying to process it. "I want to marry you, but not right now." I smiled and said something like, "Yeah, okay, I get it," because I didn't know what else to do, and I wasn't going to make a scene on the beach. She said she wasn't ready for the engagement stuff yet, that she needed more time, that it just wasn't the right moment. She didn't go deeper than that. No timeline, no real explanation, just those words and a look on her face like she genuinely meant it and also knew it wasn't what I was hoping to hear. We spent the rest of that evening pretending everything was fine. It wasn't. The whole drive home I was going back over every conversation we'd had about marriage, trying to figure out what I'd missed. Was it something about how I asked? The timing? Did I not know her as well as I thought? I didn't ask her any of it because I didn't want to come across like I was pressuring her. I smiled and we had dinner, and I told myself it was fine. Hold on a second. For anyone listening, this is me jumping in, not the OP. I need us all to sit with that phrase for a moment. I want to marry you, but not right now. That is not a rejection. But it's also not a yes. That is a software update that installs for 9 months and never actually finishes. He's on one knee at sunset with a ring, and she basically submitted a pending request. What makes it worse, she'd been telling him for 2 years she couldn't imagine being with anyone else. So either she genuinely meant it and just wasn't ready, or she said everything a person says to keep someone in their corner without intending to follow through on any of it. Both of those are problems. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to Princess Loading Screen. We never talked about it after that night. I kept waiting for her to bring it up. Some conversation a few weeks out where she'd explain what "not right now" actually meant. Was it general fear of commitment? A specific concern about me she hadn't voiced? Some timeline in her head I didn't know about? She never brought it up. And I didn't push because I was trying to respect her pace and not look like I couldn't accept the answer I'd gotten. So we just went back to normal. Trips, weekends with friends, the regular couple routine. On the surface, nothing changed, but it was always there in the background. Every engagement party we went to for someone in our circle, every time some show we were watching did a proposal scene, every time one of our parents asked with that particular tone about when we were planning to get married, I'd feel it again. That same low-grade sting sitting right there under everything. I kept telling myself she just needed more time, that eventually something would click and she'd come to me when she was ready. I genuinely believed that for a while. The relationship itself didn't fall apart. That's the part that made this whole period so hard to name clearly. We weren't fighting more. She wasn't pulling away from me. By almost every external measure, things were fine. But there's a real difference between a relationship that's building towards something and one that's just running on existing momentum. And somewhere around month 6 or 7 of that year, I started to quietly feel which one this actually was. I didn't let myself say that out loud, even to myself. I just kept going, kept explaining it away, kept stacking up reasons why everything was still okay. I remember one night we were at dinner with some friends, and one of the guys had just proposed to his girlfriend the week before. The whole table was talking about it, how he'd planned it, how she'd reacted, all of it. And I watched Nadia's face the whole time. She was smiling, seemed genuinely happy for them. She glanced over at me once during the conversation, and I couldn't read it. Was she thinking about us? Was she uncomfortable? Was it nothing? I didn't ask. I just nodded along and changed the subject after a few minutes. That's where I was that whole year. Reading things, not asking, and filling in the blanks with whatever interpretation kept the peace. I spent too much time in my own head about all of it, which Joel told me more than once. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she'd just panicked on the beach and said the first thing that came out. Maybe the setting was wrong and a different proposal would land differently. I built a whole collection of explanations for her over that year and held on to whichever one felt most comforting depending on the day. Looking back, those 12 months are probably the part of this whole story I'm least proud of. Not the proposal, not the breakup. Just those months of convincing myself it was fine when something in the back of my head already knew it wasn't. By the end of that year, I decided to try again. My thinking was, she'd never said she didn't want to marry me, just not yet. So maybe the problem was the setting. Too small, too quiet, maybe she needed something with more weight to it. I decided to go the opposite direction. I booked a botanical garden, one of those places with big stone fountains, rose arches over the walking paths, little lights strung through the hedges at night. Nadia's obsessed with plants. She has about 20 of them crowded onto every available surface in our apartment, including several I've personally killed by forgetting to water them, which she has never fully let go of. I figured if any setting was going to feel right to her, it was that one. Actually, I should back up for a second. I remember I was standing at the kitchen counter eating cereal when I made the online reservation, and right behind me her cat knocked one of the succulents off the windowsill, clean off the edge onto the floor. Third time that month with that specific plant. I just stood there looking at the dirt and thought, okay, sure. Anyway, I got our closest friends involved to help set up before we arrived. The plan was dinner at a nice restaurant nearby first, just us, then a walk over to the garden afterward. She'd have no idea what was coming. Our friends came through, roses down the path, candles, the whole setup. It looked genuinely impressive, better than I'd pictured it. Dinner went smooth. We were both relaxed, laughing, good energy on both sides. I'd spent all day quietly catastrophizing in the back of my head, running through everything that could go sideways, but sitting across from her, it all settled down. She was in a great mood. I was trying to stay present and not give anything away. After we ate, I suggested a walk through the garden. She was in. We got to the fountain, and it was all there exactly like I'd planned it. She grabbed my arm when she saw the setup. I took that as a good sign. I did the speech again. Told her I loved her, that I was sure about this, that I'd been ready for a while and I wanted her to be too. Got down on one knee, pulled out the ring. She said, "Not just yet. Pause. Let me get in here. This is me, not the story." She had roses, candles, a stone fountain, Their closest friends had set the whole thing up, and she still said not yet. That's like someone preparing an incredible meal, plating everything perfectly, lighting the candles, and you saying you're not hungry. But the second they reach for the plate, you grab it and say, "Actually, wait." She basically pulled a full Jack Dawson here, had something real right in front of her, and let it sink. Except Jack had an actual excuse. The man was freezing to death in the North Atlantic. She just had cold feet and a genuine talent for the worst possible timing. I stood up slowly. I asked her why, what was actually stopping her. I kept my voice even, but I wasn't hiding the frustration this time. She was crying, which I hadn't expected. She said the same things she'd said on the beach. She needed more time. She wanted to be sure things would work out. She just wasn't ready. I asked her if there was someone else. Not accusingly, just it genuinely didn't track for me. 4 years in. She shook her head and said no, there was nobody. Then I asked the question I should have asked a year ago on the beach. Are you sure about me? She looked at her hands. She didn't say a word. I'd been telling myself for a year that it was about timing, about the pressure of getting engaged, about needing to let her get there on her own terms without feeling pushed. Standing in that garden watching her go completely quiet when I asked if she was sure about me, that was a different thing. That wasn't about timing or settings or the size of the proposal. That was something she didn't know how to say out loud, and the silence was saying it loud enough. We sat down near the fountain, and I asked her to actually help me understand what was happening, because I'd given this everything I had, and I was struggling to figure out what else I was supposed to do. She said she did love me. She said she wanted to be with me. Then she said she just wasn't sure she was ready for the commitment of marriage and didn't want to rush into something she wasn't certain about. That's when it landed clearly. She wasn't uncertain about marriage in the abstract. She was uncertain about me. Those are two completely different conversations, and we'd apparently been having the wrong one for over a year. I sat with that for a moment before I said anything back, because I think part of me had still been holding out hope that she'd say something that made sense of it all. Some explanation that would reframe the whole thing in a way I could work with. But there was nothing there. She was looking at me with real emotion on her face and still couldn't give me an answer to the simplest question I'd asked. Not about the proposal, not about the ring. Just, are you sure about me? And the silence after that question was the most honest thing she'd said all night. I told her I couldn't keep doing this, that after 4 years and 2 real attempts, I wasn't going to sit in a relationship indefinitely waiting for her to decide I was worth committing to. She started crying harder and said, "Fine, I'll marry you. Please don't leave." And I know she meant it in that moment. I genuinely do, but she only said it because she thought I was walking out. That's not a yes. That's damage control with a ring attached to it. I didn't want her to marry me because she was scared of losing me. I wanted her to want it, to be genuinely excited about it, not just willing to agree to stop a loss. Those are two completely different things, and I wasn't going to pretend they weren't. I walked away from the garden. Yo, time out. Let me get this straight. She turned down 2 proposals, went completely silent when asked directly if she was sure about him, and only said yes when he was already walking out the door. And he's the one getting called immature by her entire social circle. That is some gold medal narrative revision right there. I fully expect her friends to launch a podcast called How He Left and Why It's Still Somehow His Fault. And Ashley, the friend who texted, "You were just a safe bet for her," thought that was going to sting him. Ma'am, you just confirmed everything he'd been quietly wondering about for a year and a half. That's not shade. That's a confession with no return address. The next few days were rough in a specific kind of way. I stayed at Joel's place. Joel's one of those guys who doesn't turn things into a moment. He just makes room, hands you a soda, and puts something mindless on TV without asking 20 questions. We played video games most nights, occasionally watched something dumb, and I tried not to let my head go to dark places. It helped more than I expected to just be somewhere that wasn't surrounded by 4 years of accumulated shared life. The first night I was there, I barely slept. Not because I was spiraling exactly, just because my brain wouldn't quiet down. I'd lie there going through the whole timeline, the beach, the year of silence, the garden, and trying to figure out at what point I should have made a different call. I didn't land on one. I think that's how I knew I'd made the right choice. When you've actually screwed something up, you can usually find the exact moment. This one, I kept coming back to the same place. I did what someone does when they love a person and want to build something real with them. The outcome wasn't what I wanted, but the decisions were mine, and I'd make most of them again. Nadia and I weren't talking. She stayed at our apartment, and I didn't go back. Then the texts started rolling in. Not from her at first, but from her friends. Then her parents. Then some of our mutual people who'd clearly gotten her version of events, which from what I could piece together went roughly like, he ended things because I wasn't ready to get married. Technically not wrong. Missing about half the actual picture. I got called selfish, immature. One person sent a long message about how I was throwing away a 4-year relationship over one small thing, apparently unaware we were now 2 occurrences deep, and I'd also just asked her point blank if she was sure about me and gotten dead silence in response. Another person told me I was scared of commitment, which is a remarkable read of the situation, given that I had proposed twice in 13 months. Ashley's message was the most revealing one. You were just a safe bet for her. She'll find someone better now. I didn't respond to that. It sat with me for a day, and then I realized it wasn't designed to hurt me. It was designed to reframe everything in a way that made Nadia the one who'd made a power move, rather than the one who'd fumbled something real. And also, reading between the lines, it was quietly answering a question I'd been circling around for a while without fully wanting to land on it. My own guys were a different conversation entirely. Joel kept it straightforward. She couldn't decide in 4 years, she wasn't going to. Matt was more blunt. He'd thought I should have walked after the beach, said the first proposal gave me everything I needed to know. He wasn't wrong about that. I just hadn't been in a place to hear it 12 months earlier. I'd wanted to believe she just needed more time, and that if I was patient and didn't push, she'd get there on her own. That's a generous interpretation. I held on to it a lot longer than I should have. The calls from Nadia kept coming. I answered eventually. She wanted to work it out, come home, said she'd been wrong to hesitate. I told her I heard her, but that a yes that arrived the moment she thought she was losing me wasn't the kind I was looking for. We both went quiet on the phone for a minute. Then we said our goodbyes. About 2 weeks after the botanical garden. Wait, no. It was closer to 10 days, actually. I just remember it felt like 2 weeks. Anyway, I got one last text from her. Short. No drama. I understand now. I'm sorry. I hope you find someone who makes you happy. No more calls. No more texts from her friends. Just silence after that. I went back to the apartment when I knew she wouldn't be there. Packed what was mine, left my key on the counter, and walked out. It took about 40 minutes. 4 years down to 40 minutes and a key on a counter. Final update. The first few weeks in my own place were an adjustment. There's no cleaner way to put it. I found a 1-bedroom in a decent part of town. Nothing remarkable, just mine. I could leave dishes in the sink because I felt like it. Stayed up too late watching things I'd been wanting to watch for years. Slept in the middle of the bed, which sounds like a small thing until you realize how much of your own physical space you quietly give up during a long relationship without ever really tracking it. What takes longer than people usually talk about is the mental recalibration. When you've spent 4 years with your daily routine, partly organized around another person, their schedule, their preferences, the shape of your evenings because of what she had going on, suddenly having no one else's rhythm to account for feels both good and genuinely disorienting at the same time. I'd catch myself about to say something out loud and then remember I was the only one in the room. Not in a sad way exactly, just jarring for a while. You get used to the texture of another person's presence, and then one day it's just gone, and the quiet feels different than it used to. The question I kept coming back to was what I actually wanted now. Not from a relationship, I wasn't even thinking about that yet. Just from my own life and days. I'd been so focused on the future I thought we were building that I hadn't really looked at what I wanted separate from that plan for a couple of years. I started small, made a list of things I'd been putting off, hit the gym with actual consistency because I had real free time now and needed somewhere to put the energy. Got into a work rhythm that was clean and focused. None of it was groundbreaking, just getting my own footing back under me. Joel checked in regularly. Matt and I started hanging out more than we had in years. The weird moments weren't the obvious emotional ones. You brace for those and they come and go. The ones that caught me off guard were the random quiet ones. Opening the fridge and only thinking about what I felt like for dinner. Driving somewhere with no need to check in. Waking up on a Saturday with a fully empty schedule and nobody to negotiate with about what to fill it with. Those took longer to feel normal than I expected, but they did eventually. The thing about going through something like this is that at a certain point, the processing stops being about the other person and starts being about yourself. Like, what do you actually want? Not just from a relationship, but from your life in general. I'd been so attached to a specific picture of the future that I hadn't really looked at the individual pieces clearly in a while. When I finally did, some of them looked different than I remembered. That part was worth something, even if I could have done without the way I got there. I also stopped explaining it to everyone who asked. That helped more than I expected. For the first month, every time someone asked what happened, I'd give this whole detailed rundown. The beach, the garden, the silence when I asked if she was sure about me. And every time I told it, I'd feel the whole thing again fresh. At some point, I just started saying, "We broke up. It was the right call," and leaving it there. Turns out that's enough of an explanation for most people. And the ones who push for more detail don't actually need it. They're just curious. Cutting those conversations short saved me a lot of energy. A few months in, Joel called and said we needed to get out and do something. Just pool, sodas, catch up, nothing heavy. We hadn't done a proper hangout in a while since work had kept us both busy. I said fine. The night started easy. We shot pool, talked about nothing requiring much thought, just the kind of back and forth that happens naturally with someone you've known long enough that conversation doesn't need effort. I wasn't thinking about anything heavy. And then about an hour in, Joel got this specific look on his face while I was lining up a shot. He said, "Hey, so, Nadia's here." I went still for a second. Then I glanced over as casual as I could. She was at the bar with a guy, leaned toward each other, laughing at something. It looked comfortable. Easy. I stood there with the pool cue in my hand for maybe 3 full seconds, and then looked back at Joel, who was watching me like he had some kind of contingency plan ready to deploy. I shrugged. "Let's keep playing." And I meant it. Seeing her didn't wreck me the way part of me had been quietly bracing for. There was something there. Not jealousy, more like that low, quiet ache that shows up when you recognize that something is genuinely, completely over. Not technically on paper. Actually over. Done. We finished the game. I didn't look back over again. When we called it a night, I went home and sat on the balcony with a soda and just let the whole evening settle over me. It wasn't heavy. I wasn't spiraling, wasn't reconstructing timelines, wasn't asking myself where it went wrong. It was just done. And I was okay. There's a version of this story where that bar scene hits me harder, where I go home and spend the next 3 weeks in my head about it. And honestly, 2 months earlier, I think it would have. The fact that it didn't told me more about where I actually was than anything else had. You don't always get clean closure moments. Usually you just sort of notice one day that you stop needing one. Wait, hold up. I need a second here. Because this man just described building an actual life on his own, figuring out what he wants, coming out the other side of a long relationship without losing his mind. And the whole thing sounds like a net positive, not a tragedy. That's what people watching from the outside miss. They see 4 years ending and call it a waste. He's describing recovery that actually worked. Most guys take 18 months to stop replaying the same arguments in their head. This one got a gym routine, a decent apartment, and a balcony to sit on. I'm not saying it was painless. I'm saying he landed somewhere better than where he was. That part matters. I don't know if Nadia ever figured out what she was actually waiting for. Maybe she did. Maybe the guy at the bar is exactly who she needed, and she'll know right away with him. Maybe she'll still be not quite ready 2 years from now, and he'll find himself somewhere familiar. That's not mine to track anymore. What I know is that I didn't miss anything obvious. I wasn't oblivious to red flags. There weren't any. Not in the traditional sense. She wasn't dishonest. She wasn't pulling away or treating me badly or checking out of the relationship in ways I could point to and say, there it is. She just couldn't answer one question. Are you sure about me? And whatever the reason was for that, fear, uncertainty, something she never let herself say out loud, it was hers to own, not mine to fix. Some people are going to read this and say, I should have had more patience. Okay, But patience has a point where it stops being a virtue and starts being avoidance. I'd hit that point somewhere around the time I was planning a second proposal instead of having an honest conversation about why the first one got turned down. I did this the way I knew how to do it, and I'd have done most of it again. What I wouldn't do again is spend a year pretending the silence was fine. What I know about myself now is that I'm not someone's safe bet. I'm not a placeholder or a backup plan or a holding pattern until something better comes along. I'm not going to wait in a relationship for years, hoping somebody eventually decides I'm worth committing to. She had 4 years and 2 real honest attempts to say yes. She didn't. The panic yes at the end, the one she pulled out the second she thought I was walking away for good. That wasn't an answer. That was fear, and fear doesn't build anything. I made the right call. It took a while to feel that clearly, but I do. Still figuring out what comes next, but I'm moving. That's enough for right now. What would you have done after that first no on the beach? Stayed or walked? Look, I know some people are going to say he should have been more patient. She wasn't cheating. She wasn't cruel. She just couldn't commit. But not ready isn't automatically innocent when it shows up twice in a row with no explanation. When the only yes she had came out the moment she thought she was losing him, that's not love deciding to show up late. That's fear. A panic yes from someone who went silent when asked if she was even sure about him is not a yes worth holding. Walking away from that isn't dramatic or immature. It's the bare minimum of self-respect with your dignity still attached. Drop your take in the comments. Was he wrong to leave? And subscribe so you don't miss the next one.